the interview is about how everybody was affected by COVID-19, and for the purpose of the interview, would you be willing to state your full name, your age, where you were living, and how did your priorities and projects that you were working on change when the pandemic hit?
Sure. My name is Portia Diaz. I'm 53, and I have a home here in Indiana on 5th Street in the borough. Right before the pandemic, we were actually in the middle of remodeling our home, and I was downsizing my bakery restaurant business, consolidating to my bakery. Used to have a donut connection on Pulley Street, and then I bought a place on Wayne, which is now T-Rex Thai restaurant. But at that time, I was there and was in the process of moving to my bakery to consolidate. I'm a retired IUP faculty, and my husband and I started 3 LLCs after my retirement. We were running Portia's Donuts, which is a bakery and restaurant, Greener Solutions, a contracting company, and Diaz and Stolitzer Properties, which is a real estate holding company. In saying this, there are really no typical days in my day. The average day is a 12 to 14 hour day, pretty much 7 days a week as a business owner. It's the nature of being an entrepreneur, so that's how I started.
So you received the questions beforehand, but is there anywhere that you in particular wanted to start?
We can do the interview. I did bring a little, this is the artifact of what the pandemic was. And I debated on bringing a brand new one that I had that was never worn. I think I had a couple left, or the ones that weren't like truly worn. And this is how tired and worn out a lot of my masks were at the time. But there is a story to that. So we can start with the questions if you'd like.
Okay. What would you like us to know first about your experience during the pandemic?
Well, first, what I'd like to say are the pandemic made us stay in Indiana County because of the lockdown. Some people did get to leave, but we stayed and hunkered down just because of our businesses. During the lockdown, the bakery business was able to stay open, and I opened for 1.5 years in the drive-through only.
In what ways did the pandemic impact your time in Indiana besides what you've already stated?
The lockdown on the other 2 businesses was very affected, because it wasn't deemed as essential. Fortunately, they found donuts and coffee to be essential, so I got to stay open, but not normal open to the public. We actually just did the drive-through, like I had stated. It impacted us a lot because we relied on all 3 businesses, obviously, for our income. Not being able to have the construction side, that was totally shut off, so we weren't able to do any work for our clients. And then the rental business really got hit, probably just like everybody else. The students left, and the majority of rentals in this area are student rentals. I also have Airbnb and travel stopped, so those got affected drastically. And our remodeled portion of our bakery actually ended up turning into our living quarters, because we just lived and worked right in the bakery because there was like no traveling, and it just made things a lot easier to stay in our place.
How did you change your priorities and like the projects or the kinds of work that you did during like the peak period of the pandemic?
Sorry, I have my.
No, you're okay.
I think I answered that with. That's what I answered with.
Oh,
Was
that's
that
okay.
big-
Well,
that
then,
big long.
well then, how have things changed since we've returned to more normal
activities. The businesses, most of them are back, but some of them aren't thriving as much as other businesses. The bakery I ran solo since the pandemic, and all that time I didn't have any employees, so I ran it as a one-woman show. I'm now starting to get back to hiring and opening in a normal sit-down environment. Like I said, for the longest time it was very just drive-through. Then it moved into just a pickup, so people would come in and just pick things up. But now it's starting to go back to a normalcy.
So then how did the lockdown impact the work-life balance? I know you talked about it a bit before.
Yeah, the pandemic wasn't bad initially for us when it first started. My husband, my daughter, and I got COVID early, like in that August, but it was all asymptomatic. So we actually closed down the bakery part because of that. We did the mandatory time to shut down and kind of let the virus work its course. We actually enjoyed that time a little bit because it was still just at the beginning. It was a time off. The weather was nice, and it was kind of peaceful at that time. And I started doing things like training for fitness and just trying to stay healthy. What was harder was the winter. So as we left that, even though we already had the virus and we had some of the immunity for it because we had it, winter was very hard because it started, the lockdown was starting to get serious. We weren't allowed to move around unless it was for going to the grocery store or whatever. So like I said, we stayed and lived in the bakery for that period, and we actually had crazy schedules. Our customers were also locked down and had nothing to do, so I started having them pre-order their things, and they would text message at like 12 at night, 2 in the morning. We would like donuts and bagels, and we'll pick them up at this time. So it was like I literally felt like I was working 24/7 because it was like everybody, and it was my fault because I told people, yeah, just text me what you'd like, So they literally, there was no boundaries at that time. I mean, it was both a blessing and a curse because after we got out of the lockdown, all my customers were trained to like pre-order, so it enabled me to actually run my business solo because a lot of the stuff I already knew what was coming, what needed to be made. But of course, that just like anything, when it's virtual on the phone, like when I used to teach class, when you have online classes, your students think they can contact you any time of the day or night or wherever you're at. So yeah, but since then, I've decided to hire, and that's kind of gun shy with it, to be honest. It's hard to start relying again on employees because you're always afraid that, well, maybe we'll have another pandemic, and then what do I do with the business with employees and so forth.
Have things changed, reverted since we're back to more normal?
I think it's changed in that I do a lot of things that only require me, or my husband's the same way with any of our business. We have a tendency to just totally do things, provide things, offer things as a business that if we didn't have employees, we can still sustain it by ourselves.
So how did the pandemic impact your relationship with community then?
There was definitely a feeling of isolation with the pandemic, and one of the biggest things I think is where my location was, and then as opposed to also to the university. I think it didn't hit me as hard as some of the other businesses that's right in town. I'm a little bit away. I'm like 4 miles from the university. So when the students left, the area. I think a lot of the downtown businesses, especially on Philly Street, really felt the impact. I had other outside communities that were more like families and residents, so they didn't leave. So that part was, I think I was kind of at a disconnect with everybody else.
And that's the shop out on 422, right?
Correct, yeah.
So now that life is somewhat returned to normal, how have your priorities, projects, like job responsibilities, like how's that evolved for you guys?
Sorry, which answer is that one? What question is that one?
3E.
3E.
That's okay.
I just don't want to repeat myself. Sorry.
No, it's okay.
Oh, here. I have a 3E here. Okay, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Well, in my own circle, the pandemic has brought my community closer. At least I feel that way. My community is, like I said, back to more of the families. Because I am a bakery, a morning shop, a coffee shop, a lot of my customers, really, I think a lot of us can say that during that time, we were very comforted by comfort food. We stayed in. There's a lot of talk about how, the pandemic 15 or whatever that everyone gained. So, food brings people together, and I think in that a lot of things have definitely have come back to a normalcy with that, and the holidays and things like that really have helped my business, because I think people stayed home and now still value staying home, and so in that aspect my business has never really slowed down what I'm doing even after the pandemic.
Okay. So we can proceed on to like question number 4.
Sure.
It was, so how has the pandemic affected your life? So when, if ever, did it start feeling real to you?
Well, first of all, now I really cherish my health even more. I've noticed things in my health that I feel are probably COVID related. Everybody jokes around about the COVID fog. I joke around saying that, I'm getting older, but I'm not gonna say it's because I'm older, it's because of COVID fog. I do feel like I have a little bit of like a PSTD from having gone through the pandemic and getting COVID and working with, even in my own restaurant, my own bakery. Sometimes I have an overwhelming feeling when there's like a lot of people, especially people I don't know, because I got so used to like having a core customer group that were like lived in the area, and I knew them, their family. You get to know people so well when things like this happen. They actually, sometimes I felt like a drive-through psychologist because people would pick stuff up and we'd have a long discussion about what was going on and things like that. So when I see people that I don't know, or like a big group of people, I have a kind of an anxiety to that. I definitely have a different appreciation also for like nature and being alone, being out in the country. I had a son that was living in New York City and a daughter in Pittsburgh at the time the pandemic hit. When the lockdown was getting instituted, my daughter, like she gets panic attacks and anxiety, so she came back home. She did not want to be stuck in Pittsburgh in a lockdown by herself, and I didn't want her to have the same thing. It was a different story for my son though, because he already had a job there, and he was already established. So for me, it became real when we were in the lockdown and I was starting to see a lot of news. Like, because where we are, a lot of here, some people would still tell you the pandemic was a hoax and it didn't happen because it didn't hit them in any way. They didn't lose anybody. They might have gotten it and not got sick. And I could have probably been that way also if I didn't know what else was going on out there was like real. And when I started seeing the news of those morgue freezers outside of hospitals, the overwhelming amount of patients going in, and like the staff of like all of the hospitals in New York, you know, just the toll it was taking on them, and thinking about my son who himself, you know, suffers from mental health issues that deal with anxiety, and I was thinking about him being stuck in his New York City place and not being able to get out. I honestly, for like almost every night for a good bit of the time we were in lockdown, I would like just cry to sleep because I just felt so, you know, just overwhelmed by the whole thing.
How did the pandemic affect your perspectives, like attitudes about community, employment, society in general?
Oh, it definitely taught me to be resilient and how to not be doing things one way. So I learned how to like make the best of what I had, especially in the business. But I feel I have, you know, my position, in my business in a way. During the lockdown, I was a lot more prepared to handle what was happening because I was by myself, you know, and I mean I had my husband and my family, but I didn't have all the employees and things to worry about, and all the crazy paperwork that a lot of the other businesses had to worry about to stay open. I was kind of in a little bubble on that hill, to be honest with you, and again, I felt a little bit of a disconnect with the whole Indiana community just because I was so far, I mean 4 miles, but it was far enough that I didn't really have any interaction with a lot of people.
Okay, so what impact did the pandemic have on relationships in your life?
I spend less time now with just acquaintances, and I'd actually focus on immediate and close families and friends. Part of that is probably because of the anxiety about being in big groups. So I learned to work and train by myself when I do anything. Prior to the pandemic, I liked fitness and nutrition and doing things, going to the gym. I really haven't gotten back into doing that kind of stuff, like going to the gym. I learned to do a lot of things independently, and I'm like kind of okay with it. I always thought that I was one of those, I had to go to the gym and work hard to get motivated because the other people motivated me. And now it's like, no, now that I think about it, it was kind of disgusting because I had to like start thinking about squirting everything down after everybody else. So yeah, that was kind of one of the biggest things. And professional relations are now for things that are more meaningful. Like I make it a priority to take time off from work and start checking things off my bucket list instead of just I don't go to meetings just to go to a meeting. You know, I've actually created my own little circles when it comes to meetings. We do things that are more tied into like maybe connecting other small businesses that you know survived the pandemic, and then we kind of are like more of a support group for each other.
Okay. In what ways do you think your experience during the pandemic has been similar or different? You talked a little bit about it before.
Sure. Experiencing the pandemic here in rural Pennsylvania is definitely different from the experience that my son has in New York City. So in saying that, for many, the pandemic wasn't even a real thing, like I said, for them in rural Pennsylvania. And I think it wasn't taken very seriously. And if if I didn't see the news or knew that my son was experiencing things, I might have just been oblivious also to what was going on in the world. Though I have relatives everywhere, I'm Filipina, so I have family still in the Philippines. I have, family across the U.S. all the way in California, and so it was like hitting in phases how the experiences were different. I had the hometown where I'm living, and it was just kind of like a domino. It hit New York City first, and so I feel like I was always already in tuned to what was happening in the pandemic versus the people around me that didn't have any connection to New York City or family or friends or anybody there. So we went about our merry way here. Like there was nothing happening until, the lockdown. So I feel like a lot of the social media kept me in touch with the realities that a lot of people were going through. And I think people here also use the social media to keep in touch, but also uneducate themselves about what was going on. So a lot of the things, because that's the thing of social media, you can pick and choose who you want to follow and believe, and that we know was a hot mess.
What are some things that you felt you might have missed out on because of the pandemic?
Oh my gosh, definitely travel. I'm a traveler. My kids are travelers. We have the wanderlust bug in us, and I actually had to reschedule 3 trips, and I still haven't gotten to go on them. We were supposed to go right before the pandemic hit. We had already booked to go to Thailand. It got canceled. So then booked another rescheduled for China. That definitely got canceled and never got rescheduled. And then just actually recently we were supposed to do another trip that was flying us into Beijing and then going into Tokyo to do a Japanese tour. And that got canceled because Beijing did stayed in a 14-day quarantine. So our stay there was only 3 days, and so obviously it wasn't going to work out. So yeah, still haven't yet booked them, and traveling has definitely been very strange and different since then.
Do you think you're going to travel
I
more
have-
after?
Oh yeah, because my bucket list has just grown. That's the one thing that I really love is traveling, and I have since then. I mean, I ran an adventure marathon in South Africa. I just went to Italy. So yeah, traveling is definitely hasn't been wiped out by the pandemic. If anything, it's just spurred that bug even more.
What aspects of pandemic life and now during the somewhat post-pandemic period have you enjoyed or disliked?
I do enjoy less crowds, so I guess I dislike crowds now. I do like that we have cleaner facilities. Like the pandemic has created a lot of, like when you travel, bathrooms are cleaner, restaurants are cleaner, at least for right now still. I do a lot more shopping online and having stuff delivered. I dislike all the higher prices of it, obviously that's associated with the pandemic, especially for my business, because then I've had to raise prices that I hadn't raised since 2016, just because everything is ridiculously, high now.
How did the pandemic impact the way you enjoy or engage with the world?
I do not do the personal interactions that I used to. If I don't have to, I don't do big groups. I do less face-to-face. If I can just text, message, FaceTime, that kind of thing. Like I said, I do more online shopping, and I do way more off-season peak travel type things. So I travel less when I travel more when people are not traveling as much. So it's usually also cheaper.
In your opinion, how do you think the Indiana community has changed because of the pandemic?
I think it has changed, definitely demographically, because one, IUP has shrunk. So when I first came to IUP and started in 2000, we were the largest of the Portia system. We had over 16,000 students, even bigger than Westchester at that time. So I believe we're down to like 9 with some online people, so maybe a little bit less than that physically here. So demographically, that changes the whole community, just because we don't have maybe as many as international students, people from other out of state, and so forth. So that downsizing, and then also as they downsize though, there was some like movement, migration into the area by non-students. Like there was a good bit of people who lived in the cities that bought up property because they didn't want to be living in the city, so they came and bought either like a vacation home or a cabin, a piece of land that they can go to get away. So that demographic has changed, and the look of downtown Indiana has definitely changed also demographically, and you will see closed stores, places that were there 2 years ago that's not there anymore. You see there's still a residual effect happening. I mean, there's businesses that were here 77 years and closed, 30 some years and closed. So, I mean, I'm not saying that the pandemic did all of that. I mean, there was already places, businesses that were struggling before the pandemic, just because IUP was also struggling. We were slowly declining over the years. So the big layoff of IUP, you guys lost so many faculty, so many staff. That's a lot of income that goes towards places like bakeries and small mom and pops. That I think that really is the biggest change that you'll see in IUP. And I also feel that at one point during the pandemic, the atmosphere at IUP was super politically charged, and that was, I think it was rough for some people rough for businesses, rough if you were a person of color, a person especially Asian. It was very politically charged because there were those who thought it was a hoax, and then there was people who, you know, really, really sided with the president or really, really sided against the president. And if you were a business and you were in the middle of it, you didn't want to take sides on anything because you just wanted to be a business. That was rough also because you were afraid to say anything one way or the other, because one side or the other side might not patronage you because you have a certain stance. There was points where if you were wearing a mask, you were automatically called, you know, liberal snowflakes or something, and if you weren't, then you were the crazy anti-vaxxers hoax. So it was a losing situation, and I think back to the normalcy, some of it has hopefully we've died down. We'll see.
How did the pandemic affect the activities that you like to do prior to the pandemic? I know you had said about travel and all that.
Travel and eating. Like travel and eating always was hand in hand for me. Like that's what, when I travel somewhere, I love finding all of the places to eat. Even just locally here, that I think has changed. One, a lot of the good restaurants have changed also, like changed hands or closed, or prices have changed. So eating for me definitely has it's not the same experience as it was, at least here. Even going to New York City, I used to visit a lot because my son was there, and eating there for the longest time was very hard. Like, you know, they were very, very strict, super strict. Like you had to write down your name, address, your all your information, just in case somebody in that place got, COVID. They would have to contact everybody on that list to let them know, because that was the epicenter. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to the day when I'm not so skittish about eating somewhere.
You can go out and just have a slice of pizza.
Yeah, and not worry, like, sometimes, you're like, it's, someone sneezes beside you, and you're like,
On that note, is there any memory about the pandemic that you want to share that was significant to you?
Yeah, during the lockdown, a friend of mine started making masks, and this is the story of that. She actually her and her daughter, she learned how to be a seamstress. She's from the Philippines, and so she was a good sewer, and her young daughter, they were bored, they were locked down, there was nothing to do, so they started sewing masks and then just donating it to the IRMC staff. So some of because at that time there was a huge shortage on masks, especially the ones that you could buy at the store. So she made a bunch, and then after she got everybody at the hospital having a mask, I'm like, well, you should make a little bit money off of this, because they were both, her and her husband were in a lockdown, so they couldn't work. So we started selling her masks at my shop. So she would make masks, take pictures. I would post them on my Facebook, and then people started saying, "Oh, these are great!" And so at 2 in the morning, I'd get a text, "Can I get a dozen donuts and a Pittsburgh Penguin, a Steeler mask, and a small and a large?" And it became this little business for the good whole lockdown. And she and her daughter, and we got her husband into being the delivery guy and taking them over to the shop. But we probably sold over 3,000 masks through the drive-thru, and it was just hilarious, because I was like, it was like serving donuts and masks through a drive-thru was like the last thing on earth that I thought I'd ever be doing, but we did, and people loved it.
So, did you develop new ways to enjoy the world during the pandemic lockdown?
Yes, I dove in even more into my little hobby of like health and fitness and nutrition, just because a lot of the studies and things people were talking about was just, if you just stay healthy, then if you get it, then you're not going to get sick like they were talking about. So for me, I did a lot more researching, doing on health, physical and mentally, what to do, how to stay positive. I gave myself some goals, created a bucket list. That's when it just started. I decided, I'm going to train for when we get out of this pandemic, I'm going to train now, and I'm going to go and sign up for a bikini fitness contest. It's my 50th birthday bucket list thing. So I did that, and I went and did the bikini contest thing, and then I was like, what else can I do now that's dealing with health and fitness? So I decided I'm going to train for a marathon, and I did that, and now I'm enjoying doing adventure marathons. So I don't think I would have got into a marathon if we were in a pandemic, but it was just something that I could do by myself on a treadmill inside. So
you just said what you just said ties in with the next question of have those activities persisted post lockdown?
Yes, most definitely.
Anything they've grown.
Highly enjoying. In fact, I just did a marathon in Key West in January for my training for the Pittsburgh Marathon in May.
So you mentioned a little bit before, like with the texting for the donuts and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
How did you connect with other people during the pandemic, during the peak of the pandemic?
Definitely social media, text message, the messenger in like Facebook and Instagram. I did a bunch of little videos. It's kind of funny because guess someday I'll look back. Even now, you know how Facebook will remind you, oh, 2 years ago, this is what you were doing, and it'll pop up, and it was like, here's me giving like a day-to-day, because we might have been one of the earlier people in the area that got COVID, at least that claimed it. But it was very, because we were asymptomatic, it was more of a very uplifting, like, hey, look, you know, I would take a video out in the sunshine, getting my vitamin D, because vitamin D is very important in staying healthy, and I would, you know, just give a little YouTube spiel about what I was doing during that time. How do I feel? What does asymptomatic means? And so forth. What am I doing while I'm in like quarantining? So yeah, that, and then I had people that like said, "Oh, thank you so much for sharing that. It was, you know, really a great thing for us to know, and it made us less like have anxiety and be scared." And so yeah, I think social media in itself, the internet was great to have. I don't know what we would have quite done. My husband and I have talked about this all the time, like, what if we didn't know? Like, what if this happened, like, well, during the pandemic back in, 1917 or something? That when people don't know what's going on, then you kind of, like, isolated, and can you imagine if, I mean, for us, we were in the rural area, but can you imagine the people in cities where they were dying and not knowing what it was, and there's nobody to let them know what was going on? So yeah, social media was a great thing at that time.
Have these practices for you changed since we're no longer in lockdown?
I don't think so. I think if not, I do a lot of it even more, because I think, well, am I supposed to stay healthy? What if the next thing happens? And then also, like, you never know now, like, when you're, you know, the next pandemic's gonna hit, so you're just gonna really enjoy the time you have. And I tend to not do anything anymore that I don't enjoy. And I think it's like eating. Why waste, when you say why waste the calories on something you don't enjoy? I feel that same way about life. Why, waste time on people that don't give you, happiness, or activities that don't give you happiness.
Do you feel your relationships with friends, neighbors, colleagues, even family, do you feel like they're the same, weaker than they have been pre-pandemic?
I think they're stronger with my true friends. Like, I think the pandemic truly made people realize who their true friends, who their family that they really care about, or who were there for them. But I also made new friends and colleagues during the pandemic that I don't think I would have made without the pandemic, because I think there's certain things, especially in the business world, that brings people into your circle when things like that happen. So.
What new skills or training did you learn because of the pandemic?
I'm a better multitasker. I always was a multitasker, but because becoming a one-woman show, it amazes me how, like, I can multitask many things. But I'm also resourceful, which is a great skill that the pandemic has sharpened. So I can, figure out how to make, what they say, lemonade out of lemons. But the biggest thing also is that I've learned how to use my watch really well. And one of them is to locate anything. And locate my phone, because I feel like I really do have some type of brain fog, and I will literally put my phone down, can't find it, can't find my keys. No.
What, if anything, changed in how you interact with people in the job and in the community?
I'm even more of a hands-on business owner, so there's really, I believe in also giving back to the community, even though I'm, not a big corporation or anything, or just a little fish. But the pandemic made you realize who had things and who didn't have things. It really showed the haves and the have-nots when the pandemic started happening and people started losing their jobs, and who were fortunate to work at home, have benefits, those kind of things. And I think, I'm slowly building my business back up, and for me, when I'm ready to retire again from this business, I plan on handing it over to somebody who would want to have a business that can survive a pandemic, run it themselves, and have it like a family-built business, and I would help somebody else. One of the hardest things in starting a business is getting loans, things like that, because it's a catch-22. So I'm hoping that somebody, maybe a culinary student somewhere from IUP would want to start a business, and I could help them transfer this business over and owner finance them and make it a transition.
What else would you like to share that we may not have asked about, or do you have a specific memory you want to share about the pandemic?
My dog Parker. He was my one and only employee through the whole pandemic. He was the security guard and the greeter of all, especially through the drive-thru. He kept me feeling safe during the lockdown. He is the doggy face in the drive-thru window, and everybody knows him. I feel many of us who have pets can relate to what I say when I say they were our therapy during the lockdown. They were there through all our anxiety. They absorbed all our sadness and pain, and some of them probably thought, what the heck, why are they here so much? But yeah, I definitely, he is a pandemic dog. He's the shop dog, but he is definitely a pandemic dog also.
How would you relay this experience of the pandemic to future generations?
I would say that it's even more important now to think about your health. Think about it when you're young, and especially not just your physical, but your mental health. I think a lot of young people went into the pandemic and had to be isolated, and they weren't in a good mental state themselves. And how do you deal with that when you're not able to have that interaction? So, I think we're getting better at talking about mental health and issues, but definitely, we need to continue that. And then also, science is always evolving. Trust the process. Just because something didn't go right the first time doesn't mean the science is wrong. It's just that it's evolving, and it's better to be on the side of science than on the side of conspiracy theories. Stay kind, compassionate, and empathetic. Resource scarcity is a horrible thing to be in when you're not kind or compassionate, and that's how you get crazy things like riots and looting and people being scared for their life. You have to make things more humane. Stay humane.
Are there experiences or mindsets that you feel would help us navigate a future crisis?
Yes, crisis dealing with humanity should never be politicized. I think that is probably one of the biggest takeaways from this pandemic, that we need to, all of us, adults, the leaders, the president, whoever they are, there should never be a political or a monetary gain from a crisis. And if there is, shame on the people who allowed it, especially humanity pandemics of global proportions. This was not just a U.S. thing. This happened all over the world, and I think next go around, if it happens again, we need to stay as a world, a global society, and not just the U.S. versus China versus Russia type of thing.
How would you describe the changes in the community since the pandemic? I know you said about the demographic change that you'd seen.
Yes. I think it's been hard for many small businesses. The big franchises, especially fast food, has definitely not, suffered as much as the small mom and pa's. But it has brought many together, and I believe that the younger generation has learned a lot from the behaviors of us adults, good or bad. So I think, I see a lot of, my generation can be kind of snarky when it comes to saying things like the, Gen Z or the millennials, but I find a lot of compassion from, especially the millennial generation, that they understand a lot of the things that has happened, because there's so many things that's changed in their generation. So
Are there any questions that you wish we would have asked about your experience that we might not have?
yeah, you kind of in a roundabout, because I kind of in a way pulled it in, but I think I would be interested in how does asking the businesses in the community, how did they feel IUP connected with the community during the pandemic?
That is a good question. How do you think you guys connected with IUP?
I think it was a very disconnect, to be honest. I mean, even prior to the pandemic, there's always been kind of the boundaries, physically and really, I want to say, logistically, the IUP campus and the actual community. I didn't see that as much until I actually retired and was on the other side of the fence as a business owner. I'm just seeing some of it. I was very encouraged. I got contacted by, but these are student-generated things, Talon tickets. It's a new, I guess, this is the first I've heard of them. They weren't there when I was part of IUP. But they are going and contacting all the businesses of what can they give as a discount to the students. And as a part of that, through social media, they give a little shout out to the business, and they're making up marketing tools to put at the business to mark that they are part of this, so that students can know where to go for student discounts. We had something like that also in place, but I don't feel it was really generated on a bigger scale. So I'm interested to see how this will actually work out.
Well, so then how are you doing now, post-pandemic?
I'm well. Because beside the occasional brain fog, and I can actually say I'm a survivor of the pandemic, the business is doing better, and I'm feeling hopeful, very hopeful.
Well, I would like to thank you for responding to our interview. Is there anything else you would like us to know, or you wanted to share about your experience with COVID?
Well, I just want to reiterate that leadership is very important in these types of crises, and I hope our community leaders learn something from this and continue to bring the community together, so that the next time we will not be in the dark trying to figure out how to survive on our own. That we as a community would feel more at ease knowing we are in it together and not divided by political lines.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Did you hit any buttons?
That's the first interview I've actually ever done.
Oh, really? Well, you did well. Is this for your class also, or?
Yes, it is for what is called oral history.
Nice.
So,
Yes.
you choose
Which is very, very important to keep a history of things. I am a librarian by trade,
Yeah, they had said
So,
that.
Yeah. So I think Harrison was the one that contacted me. He is the archivist for IUP Library, so I used to work with him also. So the university archives is a very important part of university history because everything is there.
The archive's down the ground floor, right?
Yes. Well, he's got an office upstairs for also the special collection. So on the very top floor of the
I've
library.
been in there actually.
Yeah. And historians are very library oriented.
Did you say you own Tariq Thai?
I own the building. I have my friend in there running the restaurant.
Okay.
Yeah.
I wanted to try Thai food.
It's very good, and they're
Is it
very
spicy?
authentic. You can have it whatever level you want. They do it on a scale. So if you want it at 0, you can have it at 0. But and theirs is a true authentic like spiciness. So I would stay within like 1 or 2 if you don't like it super spicy. But
I might have to take some home.
Yeah, there's some other dishes that are not normally super spicy, but I always recommend if you like fried rice, their Thai fried rice, and the pad kim mao, which is like also called the drunken noodle. That's one of the popular Thai food. Their curries are really good. If you like, they have red and yellow curry, and if you're a big duck fan, I love duck, but I like mine with a crispy skin as opposed to the soggy skin, so theirs is nice and crispy. And they have they're beautifully like arranged because they have a Thai chef that like knows food art, so they like make it very, presentations are always beautiful.
I drove in past your shop every day because I actually live clear out of Muscatine.
Oh, I used to live in Katanning, and my husband is actually, his whole family is in Katanning. Are you from the area?
Yeah.
Well, my son grew up in Katanning and went to high school